All right, so the next presentation is by Nicola Smuts-Allsop on fertility astrology.
Hello everybody, and thank you very much for coming to this lecture. It's the last lecture of the day, and I'm sure you're all very tired. I know I am. And thank you to the DIAS. Thank you to the Krishnamurti Institute for inviting me. It's very exciting to be here. So I'm a fertility astrologer, and I work in the medical fraternity, helping women to get pregnant, usually using aggressive reproductive treatments such as IVF and artificial insemination. The average age of my client or patient is about 46, so they're really struggling and they really don't have anywhere else to turn. And because I have to deal with medical doctors and I have to do the best I can for them, I have to find a way to communicate with the doctors. So I turn to them and their definitions of narrative medicine in order to find a dialogue or a way in which I could deal with them without intimidating or alienating them. And it's really interesting because the planet that rules astrology also is present in medicine. The caduceus, the symbol for medicine, is fashioned after Mercury because all healing begins with a story. And storytelling is central to the journey of self-identity. Doctors will tell you that patients talk about how their life story has been hijacked or how there is a biological breach in their journey towards self-identity. And it is this that medicine cannot address. Medicine can address the physical complaint, the physical symptom, but medicine as we know how it's practiced today, modern medicine, is hopeless at addressing the issues of the soul, or those, those non-mechanistic, non-materialistic concerns that patients have. And because it's about storytelling, the first 17 years of my life have been devoted to developing techniques in astrology that can best tell that story. But actually, the most important role is to listen to the story and to listen to the lived experience of the patient's chart through their eyes and through their body. And so I'm going to be spending the next 17 years concentrating on the client and concentrating on the patient's story. And to this end, I have made a media presentation, which is firstly a short lecture on my two favorite, most useful techniques in astrology, followed by an example chart, and then I introduce you to a couple where they get to tell their story and their experience of astrology. So forgive me if it seems to you like a shortcut or an easy way out, which it probably is, but it's just my way of allowing you to hear their story and not me just telling you their story. So I hope you enjoy the presentation.
I'm Nicola Smuts-Allsop, and for the past 17 years, I have been helping people conceive using a fairly comprehensive range of medieval or traditional astrological techniques. I am sure many of you have your own ideas about what fertility astrology might entail. For the purpose of today's lecture, however, I'll be focusing on two techniques: use of almutins and triplicity phase rulership, as these are the foundation upon which my astrology is based. This lecture is not a comprehensive list of natal signatures. It's a practical guide to implementing medieval techniques in the modern medical context. More detail on how to diagnose fertility issues will be available in my upcoming book. The algorithm looks simple, but in truth, it's beautifully complex due to the elegant philosophy behind it. If you look at the 7 points that Omar of Tibaras is using in his almutin of pregnancy algorithm, it's clear he takes into consideration the health and vitality of the person as a physical contributor to being able to fall pregnant. By using the ascendant and house cusps, the almutin is also extremely time sensitive, which is what personalizes the interpretation for the patient or client. The fact that the almutin uses an algorithm has allowed me to use it as code for a new fertility astrology app that I have developed, which is not only accurate, but highly personalized for each and every user. These techniques, which are game changers in the practice of natal astrology, will enhance your predictive ability in the field of fertility. The almutin is an algorithm of points in the chart that have to do with getting pregnant. Omar of Tiburas describes this algorithm in his Book of Nativities, translated by Robert Hand, and his calculation goes something like this. Only 7 points in the natal chart are used, and they are the degree of the ascendant, the ruler of the ascendant, the degree of the moon, the ruler of the moon, the 5th house cusp, the ruler of the 5th house cusp, the degree of Jupiter, and any traditional planet found bodily in the 5th house. By using the traditional method of calculating essential dignity of the points, we use the point system as follows. 5 points for rulership, 4 points for exaltation, 3 points for each triplicity ruler, 2 points for term ruler, 1 point for face ruler. This chart example is a case study called Amanda, which is delineated in depth in my forthcoming book. The almutin of pregnancy could turn out to be a completely different planet to the ruler of the 5th house, even though the algorithm includes the degree and the house cusp ruler in the calculation. So filling out the table to work out the almutin of pregnancy goes something like this. Write down the degree of the ascendant. Calculate column by column the essential dignities. Repeat for all 7 points listed above, and finally check visually for any planet bodily in the 5th house and add that to the list. Total up all the points to find out which planet has the most to say about getting pregnant. If we list the points of the almutin of pregnancy and add up the totals, we notice that Saturn is indeed the almutin of pregnancy in Amanda's chart. Contrary to popular belief, this is actually quite fortunate. Sometimes Saturn or Mars will be the almutin, which is a good thing. It means that by transit, perfection, or progression, you have just reduced the effect of the malefic quality of either Mars or Saturn, and a transit of the almutin to the 5th house becomes a desired one, not an indicator of delays or worse. This explains why some people get pregnant on a transit of Saturn to the 5th house and others don't. In the natal interpretation of the chart, consider the dignity, house placement, and aspects to the almutin of pregnancy as per normal. A hard aspect of the almutin of pregnancy to a benefic is good, but to the south node or modern planets, such as Pluto, Uranus, or Neptune, this indicates a variety of difficulties. If the almutin of pregnancy is the ruler of a perfected year, then a pregnancy is more likely. But if the almutin is not the perfected ruler, pregnancy can still occur if the almutin is transiting the 5th house and is aspecting angles or luminaries by solar arc, or if it is aspected in the natal chart by the perfected ruler of that particular year. Let's park this technique for now and move on to our other game changer, triplicity phase rulership. One of the most prominent writers about directing by triplicity is Dorotheus of Sidon, a 1st century Phoenician astrologer who wrote in Arabic. In the first chapter of his book Common Astrologicum, he states, I tell you everything which is decided or indicated is from the lords of the triplicities, and as for everything of afflictions and distress which reaches the people of the world and the totality of men, the lords of the triplicities decide it, in an eclipse of the sun or the moon, in which they indicate the things that will happen and for how long it will be and of what kind it will be. Directing by triplicity is a method of dividing the life of the native into 3 distinct chapters, and each chapter of life can indicate an improvement or depreciation of health, wealth, relationship, etc. The length and time of each of these chapters of life is determined by the life given by the astrologer to the native using the Alcockadon. So, for example, if the astrologer calculates that the life of the native is going to be 70 years, then one would divide the number of years by 3 and interpret the nature of those years by delineating the condition of the 3 triplicity rulers. Since Dorotheus was probably one of the earliest writers on triplicity rulership, this table has come to be known as the Dorothean triplicities. Both Mashallah and Guido Bonatti borrow this concept directly from Dorotheus, according to Robert Zoller. Neither the Common Astrologicum nor Bonatti discuss directing an almutin by triplicity, But in light of the precedent set by Dorotheus to direct nearly every point in the chart, I put forward a suggestion that one could, and indeed I do, direct the unmutant of pregnancy in the same way. Doing this produces 3 distinct phases of fertility throughout one's life, regardless of whether one is male or female. That is, I direct the unmutant in male charts as well. This is an innovative technique. There is no precedent, and I have been experimenting with reducing the number of years given to each phase of fertility. The first triplicity phase of fertility would begin at puberty to 26 years. The second phase, 27 to 38 years, and the third phase, 38 to 50 years. It's far too time-consuming for a consulting astrologer to calculate the alcohocodon for each and every person in order to ascertain the exactness of these life phases. The use of the alcohocodon itself is no longer a reliable predictor of life, as medical technology has advanced to the point that most people outlive their astrological life expectancy. Let me step you through my method. Allow me to introduce Raylene and Jacques de Villiers, who struggled through 7 IVFs before falling pregnant using fertility astrology. This is Raylene's chart. The unmutant of pregnancy, according to the table I showed you earlier, is the Sun. So we would consider the Sun's rulerships and dignities in order to assess her ability to get pregnant. We note that the Sun is succedent and not aspected by Saturn or Mars, nor to Pluto nor Neptune. A very wide opposition to Uranus is the only suggestion of the manner in which she is most likely to conceive. Directing the Sun by triplicity phase rulership means that the Moon rules the first phase of her fertility, Venus the second, and Mars the third. The first phase of her fertility life is the Moon, cadent, and in no particular dignity, opposed to Neptune. This phase can be interpreted as a period of vagueness, misunderstanding, possible misdiagnosis, and non-achievement of goals. At the time Raylene consulted with me, she was already in her second phase, so the condition of Venus is relevant. Venus is angular, conjunct Mercury and Mars, and opposed to Pluto. This period of her fertility life is fraught with surgeries, indicated by Mars, trauma, indicated by Pluto, and relationship stress, especially that we are talking about the 1st and 7th houses. The detriment of Venus in Aries can be interpreted as out of mainstream, and so we would assume that whatever treatment she was going to embark on would be out of mainstream, for example, IVF. My astrological diagnosis of her physical condition is as follows. Her fallopian tubes are indicated by Mercury in Aries, conjunct Mars and Venus, all opposite Pluto in Libra, the 7th house. A fire sign Mercury can indicate ectopic pregnancies. The conjunction to Mars can indicate surgery to the tubes, and the opposition to Pluto is a strong signature for an invasive surgery to the tubes, and the destruction of one or both of them due to inflammation or infection. The only mitigating factor is the conjunction of Mercury with Venus, and the fact that Mercury joys in the first. If it were not for these placements, I might conclude that her fallopian tubes are not in the best shape. Her uterus, indicated by the 1st house, and its ruler Mars, which is opposite Pluto, is still not looking good. Endometriosis could play a role here, or there could be something wrong with the endometrial lining. And as we know, the blood wall of the uterus is really important for implantation. Heavy bleeding during menstruation is also probable. But Mars is in rulership, so we wait to diagnose and look for further information. Her moon in Gemini indicates eggs that mature a little out of sync compared to the norm, usually in late maturation, as Gemini is also one of the barren signs. On investigation, her eggs might not have a follicle in them, and this might prove tricky on egg retrieval in the process of IVF. The moon is also opposite Neptune, so sometimes the egg is not physically visible on ultrasound scans. The moon opposition to Neptune also speaks of hormonal imbalance. This may manifest independently and can indicate issues during puberty or menopause and have nothing to do with fertility. Or it may have a direct bearing on someone's fertility. It may allude to thyroid issues or even a manifestation of using hormone therapy during aggressive fertility treatment. Sometimes astrologers think of Neptune as a planet of disillusion or illusion. So it is worth noting that the condition of the egg is not what it seems, and that sometimes test results can be misleading, and that sometimes a perfect-looking egg can fail to deliver. Or there might be some chromosomal damage to the egg, in which case implantation might occur, but at some stage there might be arrested development of cell division and the embryo might not mature into a blastocyst.
I had polycystic ovarian syndrome. You do put on a lot of weight and your hormones are out of balance. My AMH level was okay for my age, and FSH as well, which was also okay for my age. So finally what the diagnosis was that I had polycystic ovarian syndrome. That meant was that in the beginning of the cycle I used to have lots of estrogen, and towards the end of the cycle, as I ovulated, the progesterone would peak, but about 2 or 3 days later it would drop off, which meant that holding on to a pregnancy would be very difficult anyway, because my progesterone at the end of the cycle was extremely low. They weren't sure of the quality of my eggs because we'd had a lot of fertilization but no pregnancy. And we did 2 donor cycles which were unsuccessful. We had done 6 IVFs before meeting with Nikki, and each one of those IVFs I only produced a very small amount of eggs, probably between 4 and 5 each cycle, and they were very poor quality and they didn't really fertilize much at all. After consulting with Nikki for our 7th IVF, the difference in the quality and number of eggs was actually phenomenal. And when I had the 7th IVF after seeing Nikki, there were probably about 27 eggs, of which about 20 fertilized that time. If I could give some feedback as to the consult we had with Nikki, is that I feel that she was 100% correct in everything that she told us.
This is Raylene's husband's chart, Jacques. His Almuten of pregnancy is also the Sun. His Sun is in Taurus in the 12th house. Both his triplicity phase rulerships for his major life phases and his Almuten are indicated by the Sun, an Earth sign ruled by Venus, Moon and Mars respectively. He is in his 2nd phase of life, so we look at the Moon. Some astrologers would say that his Sun in the 12th house is in a weakened position, but more traditional methods of using whole sign houses would put his Sun in the ascendant, thereby strengthening its position. The Sun is in a T-square, in opposition to Uranus, and square the Moon. The opposition to Uranus suggests the manner in which pregnancy is going to be achieved. No besiegement from Mars or Saturn threatens his ability to conceive, although the square from the Moon to Uranus suggests it might be an out-of-body or technological experience. The Moon in male charts indicates genetic material, and this square to the Moon suggests surgical or technological intervention required for fertilization, or perhaps that fertilization will happen in a disassociated fashion, for example in a petri dish while undergoing IVF. Using whole sign house systems, the Moon is also in a wide conjunction with Jupiter by sign, although separating, but applying to a conjunction with a part of fortune. So we could say that the 2nd part of his life is going to contain issues to do with his partner's children, and with some medical surgical issues with the square to Uranus in the 6th house for his partner also, since Uranus is by whole sign in the 7th. The challenge to the Almuten of pregnancy is also noted in the square to the Sun, although the aspect is technically separating. It is the separation of the hard aspects and the applying of the conjunction of the Moon to the part of fortune that hints at the successful outcome. But before the conjunction to the part of fortune, the Moon will first square Uranus, then Mercury, then trine Neptune, to finally square Mars at 20 degrees 57 Aries. It could be anticipated that he might have some laparoscopic surgery, perhaps followed by some strife on the home front and some sudden unexpected events related to his 7th house partner regarding children.
I had a low sperm count and I was diagnosed with what's called a varicocele. I had an operation to fix the varicocele, but unfortunately there was a complication and that formed into a hydrocele, so I had to have a secondary operation. When we first met Nicola online, she said that I've been through operations to try and fix and try and help my situation. And that kind of blew me away, but it's not easy as a man to accept that you have a problem, you have to fix everything. It was a very uplifting experience to be able to say, okay, well, maybe there is one more chance for us. we were at a point where we felt like there's no more chances.
So now let's take a look at the transit charts of Raylene and Jacques. In particular, we want to compare a failed IVF cycle with a successful IVF cycle and demonstrate the relevance of our two game-changing techniques, namely the unmutant of pregnancy and triplicity phase rulership. Raylene consulted me in early 2010. She recently had a failed IVF cycle in the December of 2009. A quick look at that chart with reference to the two techniques we are discussing goes something like this. Her perfected ruler for that time period was Venus, as it was a Libra perfection. Her unmutant is the Sun. The triplicity phase ruler of her unmutant is Venus, and the issues that color that time frame have to do with 1st to 7th house concerns, as Venus is in the 1st but ruling the 7th. Venus is conjunct Mars and opposite Pluto, so this time period looks fraught with health complications and a potentially severe impact on her marriage and relationship. The transit charts that I use in Solar Fire looked like this. I highlighted the time of her treatment in the green block, and also the fertile signatures leading up to and beyond her IVF cycle in yellow. Essentially, I need to see a build-up of smaller fertility signatures in the left margin, but I focus on when the solar arc appears in that time frame or thereabouts. As you can see in the transits for her failed IVF, there are no solar arcs highlighted, and the 3 green stars indicate some heavy transits of Saturn and Pluto, which remind us that this perfected year is one where Pluto opposes the ruler of this perfection natally. On this bi-wheel, we notice the transiting Saturn-Moon conjunction in Libra and the conjunction of Jupiter and Neptune. Neither are encouraging portents of fertility for this period. The next slide is of the transits at the time of her first successful IVF after consulting with me. The perfected ruler changed from Venus to Mars. So instead of Venus being conjunct a malefic Mars, Mars now enjoys a benefic embrace from Venus. This opposition to Pluto from this conjunction should by traditional methods be ignored, but since all outer planets are considered malefic, I'll include the signature as an omen. Notice too that Saturn in this time frame has retrograded back into the 6th house and is no longer angular and a threat to a pregnancy. Indeed, it forms a trine to her Sun, the unmutant of pregnancy. All in all, this looks like a much better year in which to conceive compared to December 2009. Venus is also the triplicity phase ruler of her unmutant and is found in the 1st house, aspecting Mars, and is ruled by Mars through the sign of Aries. Raylene's embryo transfer was on the 10th of May 2010 in the green block in this slide. Not only is there a solid build-up of smaller fertile signatures in the left-hand margin, but there are 2 solar arcs occurring with rapid frequency, and their impact on her ability to conceive is emphasized. Now it is Jacques' turn. In December 2009, during their 6th failed IVF, Jacques' chart looked like this. The perfected ruler for the year of the failed IVF is Jupiter, which is natally ruled by the unmutant of pregnancy through the sign of Leo. Jupiter is also in a wide conjunction with the Moon and dragged into the T-square of Uranus, Sun, Moon. Jupiter, however, rules the 8th house and the midheaven by Placidus, and by whole sign, the 8th and the 11th houses. Children and parental status come under focus, as does the potentially negative interpretations from the 8th house of death and irrevocable change. The triplicity phase ruler of his unmutant of pregnancy for this period of time is the Moon, who is cadent using Placidus, but angular in whole sign. The transit chart shows the time frame of the failed IVF in the green block as before, and you will notice 1 solar arc through the beginning of November with a few fertile signatures, but nothing plentiful in December, and especially not around the 10th of December, the date of the embryo transfer. 2 green stars indicate some sinister transits that could inhibit fertility. Comparing this chart to the chart of the successful IVF, we notice the following. The perfected ruler for that time frame was Saturn through the rulership of Capricorn. The house that should come under scrutiny is by whole sign the 9th, but using Placidus, the whole sign Capricorn is intercepted in the 8th house. Aquarius rules the Placidus 9th and the whole sign 10th, so we will assume that his social identity or his parental access will receive a bit more focus this year, given that his natal Saturn is on the 4th house cusp, trining the Sun, his unmutant of pregnancy. The green block indicates the time frame of the IVF cycle. There are 3 solar arcs leading up to the cycle that will still have an impact all the way through to the end of May, as solar arcs are slow-moving and long-lasting in effect. The 1 solar arc to note with keen interest is that of Venus to the Sun, indicated by a yellow heart. Venus, the planet of wish fulfillment of women in general, or of all things feminine, is conjuncting his sun, the Almutin of pregnancy, on the 27th of April. I suggested this time frame to Jacques and Raylene based mostly off Jacques' chart. The solar arc of Venus to the Sun is what convinced me to be emphatic about that particular time. A person will only ever receive one solar arc like this in a lifetime, and it could have happened anywhere between the ages of 1 and 45, but this was the time. And considering that the Sun is the Almutin of pregnancy, it seemed a sure thing. Their charts are not particularly challenged. We notice that the Uranus square Moon and Uranus opposite Sun in both their charts seems to indicate the how they will get pregnant. But there is nothing to suggest that it was impossible, based on the status of the Almutin of pregnancy in both their charts, even though their medical history told a more harrowing narrative. On the 10th of December 2010, Raylene delivered triplets at 33 weeks. All healthy, all have turned into very beautiful little girls. Naturally, the doctors who had thought all along that her egg quality was inadequate had to rethink their judgments. Her astrology at the 40-week mark of her pregnancy was equally relevant. Her due date would have been the 2nd of February 2011, the very day Jupiter conjunct her ascendant exactly. When looking for potentially fertile times, it is useful to look 40 weeks ahead and see what is happening astrologically that can support the narrative of a happy ending with a live birth. When one sees that a 40-week period is book-ended with 2 fertility signatures, then one can start being bolder with a prediction. In astrology, fertility signatures can be either a conception or a birth, so one can use the end time as a start time and vice versa. So if Raylene had still not fallen pregnant by the 2nd of February 2011, she could have used that potentially fertile time to start her treatment.
When it started coming out, the joy is just, you just cannot describe it.
Oh, congratulations! Finally, I have gotten it to the end.
One of the reasons why I really like using the Almutin of pregnancy is that it really individualizes the chart. There is no doubt about it. Using the Almutin of pregnancy has changed my approach to my practice. The use of the Almutin fully acknowledges the individuality in the chart and helps the astrologer differentiate between whether a transit of Jupiter is going to be an art exhibition, a book, a holiday, or a baby.